Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and I've got a pretty serious question for you, my friends, and that question is, what do you think they're doing with your DNA? You know, you send it off to a total stranger, you're hoping to find out something about yourself, but the only way they can find anything about you is by comparing your DNA to that of others. Meaning there's a huge database out there that a bunch of people that you don't know have access to. Well, that doesn't really give you a whole lot of pause, because it's not like you're sending them your social security number or your passwords or your credit card information. You're not really sending them your personal data, except that maybe there is somebody that's interested in it. And maybe that somebody is Satan himself. Why would Satan be interested in you? Well, because maybe you have the bloodline of the line of Aaron. You mean there's a DNA test that can determine whether or not I'm related to the Aaron of the Bible? Yes, there is. As a matter of fact, it's the only marker that exists within the Jewish lineage that determines a Y chromosome marker that takes you back to the line of Aaron. Well, why does that matter to Satan? Because over the history of time, Satan has tried to wipe out the Jewish people to keep the birth of Jesus from happening, and now to keep the return of Jesus from coming about. And if he can wipe out the Levitical priesthood, he can wipe out the ones who will form the Sanhedrin, the high priest that will lead the Sanhedrin, calling for the return of Jesus. And if Jesus doesn't come back, then Satan continues to rule this earth. That is the plot of the best-selling thriller called The Codist, now out in its second edition, available to you at a very special price of $2.99 on Kindle. We're going to take you on a journey through the Bible like you've never seen before, introducing you to the weaponization of DNA and why that should matter to you. It may be provocative, it may be fiction, but it's so real and so true to the Bible that you almost can't tell the difference. And then I want you to go to our webpage, ignitinganation.com, click on this yellow cover of the book entitled The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. Click on the book, and we're going to ask for your email address. We're going to send you an email, but we won't send you spam, because spam is not kosher, but we will send you the first chapter of this book and have you start on this journey where God uses 7 things of the natural to reveal supernatural truths from the Garden of Eden, the Tree of Life, and that same tree we see in the River of Life in the book of Revelation. I want to welcome into our program Bruce Hartman, author of Jesus and Company, Connecting the Lessons of the Gospel with Today's Business World. Prior to founding Gideon Advisors, a Christian advisory firm committed to walking with people into a brighter future as they navigate life and career transitions, Hartman was the Executive Vice President and CFO at Yankee Candle Company, Cushman & Wakefield, and Foot Locker Incorporated, where he was known as a turnaround expert, bringing companies back from the brink of near bankruptcy and on to sterling success. Earning his master's in divinity and doctorate from Drew University Theological School, Hartman writes, "Who is Jesus to our current marketplace? He's the founder of the largest organization in the world. He worked his way up from the bottom of the marketplace. If he booked a speaking tour in contemporary times, he would sell out every venue on the tour. He's a gifted strategist and keeps the road straight. He's been there and knows our issues, but most importantly, his words and present are as available to us today as they were for the first century marketplace." Bruce Hartman, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Well, you're very welcome. It's a delight to have you on the program with us. So let's take you back, though. As we do in the Bible, we always start with Genesis. And let's look at the genesis of who Bruce Hartman was and who his influences were when he was little Bruce Hartman, growing up in a family, and what that family environment was like and where those faith influences came, and how you came to know of the salvation that's only available through a personal relationship with the Messiah.
Well, a pretty typical childhood. I had a great mom, great dad. My dad to me is, if I do something I can't tell my father about, I shouldn't be doing it. Mom was a great, typical church mom. We went to school. We went to Sunday school every Sunday, went to church every Sunday. She was always involved with the potlucks and the various charitable things that churches do. So it was a heavy influence in my childhood. We were Congregationalists. I'm now a Methodist, but we were Congregationalists then.
Okay. And so you came to faith, made a profession of faith at what age?
16.
16. And what was that like for you? What changed in your life, or was it just status quo, and now you fit into the family moral structure and the church moral structure, or was it a more transformational experience for you?
I wouldn't call it, it wasn't transformational at that point. It was more one of obedience, obedience to your parents and to the authority figures of the church. It wasn't until later in my business career that it became transformational.
Well, let's talk about that. What does your dad do for a living?
My dad worked as an equipment installer for the phone company. In other words, particularly during the 60s and the 70s, as phone services became more complicated, he installed central offices throughout New England.
Okay, for New England Telephone, part of
Yes.
part of the Bell system. All right, I was with Southern Bell and helped navigate through divestiture of the phone company and wound up with AT&T prior to my tenure at Hewlett Packard. So those are the two major Fortune 100 companies I worked for, was AT&T and Hewlett Packard. So this is what you and I share in common, is this incredible background of many years in corporate America. And so I came to faith in 1996 after already being in corporate America since the 70s. So, you know, a radical change for me as well, coming from a Jewish background. So Dad was a steady Eddie, steadfast. Mom was involved in the church. And where did you do your undergraduate work?
At a small business school in Boston called Suffolk University.
And so you plotted out a career path for yourself that had nothing to do with faith, had nothing to do with ministry. You went off, and when you graduated, what was the first job that you had?
Well, I worked for a company today that's called Deloitte Touche, and when I went to work for them, they were called Haskins and Sells. It's a CPA firm that the higher grade average accountants went to work for firms like that, and you worked there for 3 years, kind of as intern training to be a business person.
Well, I'm also very familiar with Deloitte Touche and KPMG and all of what used to be called the Big Five, Big Six, because at Hewlett Packard, they were our strategic partners for the implementation of our servers and software and doing business consulting. So I'm really quite familiar with the upbringing, the path to partner, the whole understanding of business. So did you consult for them? Did you wind up in the consulting practice or in the audit practice?
No, I actually worked in the small business practice.
Okay.
The audit practice was a little too stiff for me, and the consultant I was too young for at the time. So I did a lot of small business work with small business owners and things like that.
So faith yet had not surfaced really as paramount in your business dealings at this point?
It was always the undercurrent, you know, particularly from an integrity standpoint. And, you know, there was always this glimmer that was always burning. When I would do something good, I would make the sign of the cross like that. Even there was a lot of praising God because I had a lot of good things happening in my life. So,
like the NFL, moms and God get the most credit for things. So
yes.
The same way in your case, Mom and God got the credit and the glory because she was the one that fixed the food and did all those things at church.
Right.
It's interesting. So where did you go from Deloitte?
So from there, I went to work for a company called May Department Stores. You would know them, Lord and Taylor, Robinson, certainly out in the Southwest. I worked for them for 10 years, and I was in 7 different divisions. And it was there that I noticed, and as well as the company noticed, that if there was a troubled company, I could go there and significantly improve their performance.
Another interesting connection, my father came out of Associated Dry Goods, ultimately Macy's and the Lazarus family, and out of Pittsburgh. And so my first job out of college was in New York City, working for Wrangler Jeans in the New York City showroom before I migrated south. So very interesting. I told you we had a lot of parallels, a lot of things in your background that you and I would connect on because of that. We're the unusual ones that lived a fully rich corporate life and then wound up in full-time ministry, not swept up in the Jesus movement. Our years of employment are pretty close to each other, so very, very similar in that way. At what company and what position did you begin to connect the dots of Jesus in the marketplace? Because I grew up in the world of gamesmanship. If you remember the book that came out many years ago about gamesmanship, you escalated your career and you climbed on the backs of others in order to climb the corporate ladder, never looking back at the pile that you left behind, and knowing that it was not the most qualified that ever got the promotion, it was the one that was best positioned and the best networked who got the promotion. And so that's what you worked on, and it wasn't really people skills or compassion. It was excellence in exceeding business goals and business plans.
Yeah, well, I was really lucky, particularly at the start was at May department stores. You got ahead by producing results, but there were four other things that you had to have. You know, obviously the first was having a high moral compass. Two, what we just talked about, getting things done. Three, the ability to listen, not to rebut, but to listen, and the ability to develop others around you. So do you make other executives great? And then the fifth and last, obviously, for all businesses, can you analyze the facts? So those were the five core principles I learned at May Company. And when I went to Foot Locker, which was right after May department stores, a lot of the principles I was taught, I was able to apply. And thankfully, I was also able to recruit a lot of people that had those values. And that's really what saved Foot Locker from the brink of bankruptcy. It wasn't necessarily me, but it was the principles I had learned at May department stores and the wonderful people that worked for me, which I detail in the book, Jesus and Company.
Yes.
It was also there that my pastor started seeing this glimmer that I wasn't seeing and was encouraging me to maybe change my career. And so I would hear him, and I would help out at the church and maybe get a little more involved in the average person. But it was at this point that these messages started to come. But they really weren't answered until I was at Yankee Candle, which was about 10 years after they started probing, that I really had an experience one morning that said, your life is going the wrong way. You have the money that you need for your family and for the benefit of your children. It's now time to turn to me. So there was a crisis in my life, a crisis with my faith, and it was from that point forward that I started this journey to getting my master's degree and my doctorate degree.
The crisis you talk about, was it like Jeremiah talks about, where he says, when you come to the crossroads, choose the ancient path, and there you'll find your peace?
It was that, and you know, it's interesting. What was startling about it was what you were giving up versus what you were gaining. You know, today, as I look back at that period, I said that shouldn't even have been a debate. You know, you're giving up power. You're giving up, you know, a seven-figure salary. You're giving up, you know, being able to tell people what to do, to go to a place that's new and different, and you had no idea what was there for you, but you knew it was better than what you were doing. And I remember that night on the bench, sitting there having that debate with myself, but it almost appeared like I wasn't in the debate. It was God and the world. And it was almost like I was a spectator watching how my life was going to turn out.
You know, I had that exact same experience at the exact same level of earnings, at the highest earnings of my life. The highest earning years, you look at my Social Security statement, the highest earning year was the year that the Lord called me to leave corporate America and come to a city that I had never been to, in a place that I did not know a single person, and plant a congregation where there was not one, and to start a brand new work that became a milestone in Messianic Judaism for being the fastest growing Messianic synagogue in the world.
Wow.
Walking away from that, others had spoken that very thing. Look at what you're giving up. Look at what you're walking away from. And I thought to myself, you know, when I came up in sales, the motto on which I was raised up under was nothing happens in the world till somebody sells something. So I was given this honorable profession. So if you looked at my background, educational background, I have a Bachelor of Science in elementary education with a minor in special education. And so I had no business preparation whatsoever, but I had an opportunity to leave teaching kindergarten, which paid $500 a month, to go to New York City that paid $1,000 a month and provided housing and an expense account and a driver and Broadway tickets, and I could be an entertainer in a showroom entertaining buyers. And so if you were with May Company, you know all about the buyers and the lavish dinners and the drinks and the theater tickets and all those things to get that business. And yet I worked for a retired Marine colonel that pointed his finger in my face and said every hangar's going to be perfectly straight, but nothing in the world happens till somebody sells something. So this is the most honorable, highest level in the economy, is the beginning. It is the apex, and it is the genesis of all the economy. Nothing happens till somebody sells something. So now I'm looking at this and I'm reading the writings of Paul, and what's Paul doing? Paul is out there selling. I'm looking at it through carnal eyes. He's out there selling salvation and this concept of Jesus and this, and I'm thinking, that's the highest calling. That's the apex. Yes, nothing happens until the gospel is preached and lives are being transformed. I've got to do this now that I know the truth. And so I was all excited about it. Everybody was like, I can't believe you're selling this 7-bedroom house on 3 acres. I can't believe you're walking away from all of this. So I understand exactly that feeling that you're talking about. Although I didn't have the feeling, everybody expressed that feeling to me. They tried to imprint that on me, but you actually went through that yourself, and that was somewhat of a crisis because you were leaving the corporate world to go to college. Back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. We're talking with Bruce Hartman, author of Jesus and Company, Connecting the Lessons of the Gospel with Today's Business World. Bruce, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Bruce, when we left off before that little interruption that we had, we were talking about you stepping away from corporate America and kind of sitting on the bench struggling for which way to go. Do you continue? You had accumulated enough investments, and I'm sure that you did well in this turnaround as a turnaround expert in making sure that you were compensated for the turnaround. And so here you are at the crossroads, and you make the decision to leave the corporate world, not because of retirement, not because of lack of opportunity, but what was the motivating factor for your stepping away from corporate America?
Well, it was two things. One was a sense of doing good, and I think that's what the calling had been for the previous 10 years. And the second reason for leaving is I was fearing that I was losing God. I was fearing that at this juncture felt like I didn't even know how to pray anymore. And of all the things that could happen to me in my life, the lacking of the ability to pray was probably the most difficult part of the crisis.
Did you share this with your wife?
Yes, I did.
And what was her response?
My wife she's an extraordinarily faithful person. I mean, she has what I call elevator faith. She just assumes it's there and just goes. So she totally got it. She was very encouraging for this transition. And, my wife, she will believe two things: one, to do what I think is best, and two, to follow God.
Okay, so you wind up taking a very sharp, radical turn in your life, and you wind up in the Master's of Divinity program at Drew University Theological Seminary. What was that like for you?
It was reconstruction, and certainly you can identify with this, the certain mannerisms and the ways that we had to get things done, in school, I had to adjust to. It was almost like being 18 again. You're at the bottom, you're at the new spot, and your credentials don't matter. And so that took like 6 weeks to get through, that I just couldn't say do this or do that. So that was the first thing. But the second thing was, and I was lucky because of my Methodist background, I was luckier than a lot of my other incoming students, is there's also a deconstruction of what you think about God and what you think about Jesus. And it's more of a creation of a more personal relationship with Jesus and with God. So in other words, it's a faith where you steer the canoe to Jesus. And a lot of the things that we heard in Sunday school, we just revisited. So it was really a stripping away of everything we had learned and personally rebuilding our relationship with God.
So you went from a Master's Divinity and then went on and got your doctorate, and then you launched Gideon Advisors. And that's kind of where we are at this point with the book, Jesus and Company, connecting the lessons of the gospel with today's business world. Certainly we've read of Pottery Barn, we've read of In-N-Out Burger, we've read of Chick-fil-A, being what we consider to be the top tier faith-based companies that model themselves of putting John 3:16 in the bottom of the In-N-Out Burger cup. Pottery Barn taking their stand against abortion, saying that they would rather close shop than adopt a health care plan that it was mandatory to offer to their employees that would endorse such a biblically prohibited behavior. And of course the founding father, Truett Cathy, who believed that you could close and honor God on Sunday and survive in the corporate world. And he's the brand icon for, we're going to stand in the face of the world and we're going to stand fixed and firm in our faith. We're actually just going to hire, get this, Christians. We're going to ask you about your faith in the interview. And that is, as a private corporation, our right and privilege. You can come against us and take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. We don't care, because we're a private corporation and we can use that in our hiring practices. We do take time for prayer. We do say, God bless you, and we're fine with that. So here you are, you now have your doctorate, and as you're working on your thesis and on your on defending this peer-reviewed work that you developed, is this book the outcropping of that work, or is this in addition to that work?
I would say it's in addition to that work, and there's some synergy between the two. Some of the research that I used for Jesus and Company, I used in my thesis, particularly the historical or the history that you find in Jesus and Company.
When we look at Jesus and marketplace values, can you sum up for us from a biblical reference standpoint. What were Jesus' marketplace values?
Well, I think that if we go back to his 2 commandments, love thy God and love thy neighbor. So when you think about it and there's 2 parts of this answer. So when you think about it, love thy God. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he relents and says, not my will, but yours. So when we make business decisions and we think about what we ought to do, having that message and lesson in our heart is really important, because whatever we do should be for the benefit of God. Now, the second piece of that is love thy neighbor. As a salesperson, you certainly understand this. You can do a short-term sale that benefits you, but may not benefit the customer. Or you can do a sale that benefits the customer and eventually will benefit you. And we already know which one Jesus would pick. He would never do anything to harm his customers.
Right.
So there's 2 models to follow there. Is answering the ethical question of what we ought to do is in the Bible. I mean, all you really probably even need to do is read the Gospels to be able to answer those questions on a day in and day out basis. But our neighbor, which is our banker, which is our customers, which is our vendors, which is our employees, they're to be treated with the same standard that Jesus would expect us. But not only is it a biblical imperative, it's also a business imperative, because the better you treat people, the more sustainable your business will be.
So when we look at Jesus as a marketplace expert, he truly went into the community and radically changed the community. Kind of like you did as a turnaround specialist and what I did as a rainmaker. Kind of two parallel worlds working from different sides of the same table. But I was called a rainmaker and you were a turnaround specialist. And so this is what we did, and we were defined by that title. How is Jesus a marketplace expert? It sounds almost intentional that he would know the marketplace and be able to affect change for the better.
So there's 3 different paths to think about here. Number one, in the Bible, particularly in the Gospels, we hear of Jesus twice. Either his father was a carpenter or he was a carpenter. So one of the things I did a lot of background work, 1st century carpentry, and I looked up I studied the word tekton, which is the Greek word for carpenter, and what does it mean? What did it mean in ancient Greek? So it meant that Jesus was an artist. Then the second thing is you look for writings that are non-biblical to support what the Bible's saying. And there is some writings from Josephus that describes Jesus as a yoke maker. So we can be fairly certain that he was a carpenter. The second clue we get is there is 42 parables. And if you read 35 of them, you'll see commercial language. So why would Jesus do that? As is true in America, was as true in Judea. People have bills, they have to work, and they want a relationship with God.
Right.
That's his audience. So when he's talking parables, he's going to talk in a language that they get. Do not put new wine into an old wineskin, the parable of the talents. So a number of these parables are directed at things that people would understand. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the 1st century, the literacy rate was extraordinarily low, not because the people weren't smart or they certainly weren't ignorant. It was just very hard to read Aramaic or Greek or any of the languages because vowels didn't exist and spaces between words didn't exist. And Hebrew, by the way, was written from right to left, as you know.
As I do know.
So you have to tell memorable stories to get to people's heart.
Yes.
You can't give them stories that are going to be hard to retain. So Jesus talked in a language that they understood. And that's why the parables directed. Now, let me take you to the 21st century. 160 million Americans are working today. 120 million of them are Christian, but only 20% of them go to church. The part of the reason why I wrote the book was to get to that group the same messages through this book in a language that they could understand, similar to what Jesus did. So that's why, I personally feel he was a marketplace expert. I can see him in Nazareth running a small carpentry shop, doing a wide variety of artisan work.
You point out so eloquently in the book that not only was he a marketplace expert, but he was a faithful and ethical employee.
Yes.
He was, the first time we get evidence of that is as a 12-year-old boy, and his parents are leaving Jerusalem, 2-day journey out, headed back to the Galilee, and they look around and he's not with them. And so they come back and they find him sitting there in a conversation with the rabbinate, and they say, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm about my father's business." And he actually uses the word business.
Right.
And wait a second, we're supposed to be super spiritual. This is my father's business. He wasn't negotiating a carpentry contract. He wasn't talking about renovations and putting together sketches of bids for how he was going to take and repair Herod's temple. He was there talking about his father's spiritual business as his incarnate representation, but not yet demonstrably in his ministry, which
right.
would not occur for 18 more years.
Correct. So the reason I put that chapter in is that he says, I can only do what I see the Father doing. And in a successful business, staying with the team, working with the team, helping the team is the number one responsibility of an employee. So that I draw this correlation in the book about being a faithful employee, not working for yourself, but working for a company, working for a boss, working for other employees, working for your customers. That's why I pointed that out. He's a model in that regard.
Bruce, it's so interesting you say that. Every one of us is familiar with some store that's called Joseph and Son or Bob and Son or Phil and Son, and you go in there and you've been going to that same store year in, year out, and finally you walk in and ask and say, well, is Mr. So-and-so in? And no, I'm sorry, my father's passed away, but I'm his son. And they say, well, you know what? The store looks the same. The service is still the same. I'm going to continue to frequent it because your father left you with a good model, and it's the model that worked because he's about his father's business. He's doing what he saw his father do. He's saying what he heard his father say, which is so practical in the business world of, look, you and I both learned from sage wisdom of people, the 1-minute manager, Good to Great. I mean, go on down the list of the books that you and I have read during the course of our careers so that we didn't have to experience some of the pitfalls that other people experienced, and we learned lessons both through education, experience, and continuing to read and get up to speed in motivational techniques and tools, but it was about being faithful and ethical.
Right, and that's and that I draw that out in the book. It was one of the lessons I learned in business was it was really not about what I did, but what everybody else did. It was my best thing I could do was make sure that everybody was working together. And we were working for a common cause. And I think particularly as a senior manager, the less credit you take, the better off the organization is. And I think Jesus embodied that. And it's one of the reasons why it's the world's largest organization, even 2,100 years later.
What's the significance of Jesus being a reputational borrower?
Well, this is a good point. I almost every interview I get asked this question. in business, particularly when you need help, you get help because people know you to be an honorable and reputation, have a strong reputation. People that don't get help have in the past not been honorable or have done something to sully their reputation. So you look at Jesus, there's three incidences that I think are really audacious requests on his part. Number one, he goes up to a small boy and asks for loaves of bread and fish that would cost 6 months' salary from a boy. I don't know about you, but try asking your kids for French fries that you just bought them. You're not going to get them. So he was such a strong personality in terms of his reputation and integrity that even this boy gave him the loaves of bread and the fish that Philip had said was 6 months' salary. Number one. Number two, on the Palm Sunday, he goes and gets a colt and a donkey in town. And for us in the 21st century, that may not seem like a big request, but it was a big request. It's like asking for a minivan and a truck. It's a lot to ask for, particularly for a person just entering into town. Third thing, he goes to an innkeeper and says, can I borrow your upper room? On Passover, they would all be sold out like any of our major cities for a big event like that. Jesus was able to borrow that. So he had a great reputation, and that's what we talk about in that chapter, is the importance of your reputation in terms of modeling Jesus's behavior, in terms of what you can achieve and provide for your business.
It's something I hadn't really thought about until I read your book. He was a networker. He was somebody that was skilled at engaging people. He had access. You know, one of the things people don't realize, with favor comes access. And
Right.
and networking is something that you and I know quite well, is what opens the doors to others' boardrooms to get us audiences where other people weren't able to get. It was through our network. How did Jesus network?
He walked. He walked around. He didn't sit behind his desk. And one of the things he did is he treated people not as a way to get something done, but he treated people as individuals, got to know them. And we talk about that again in this chapter. I do a lot of counseling with young people, and I say, you got to build your network. But that doesn't mean you call them whenever you need a job. That means you call them and ask them about their lives and about their kids and about their grandkids. And you have to really care about people. And I think Jesus did that. And that's how you get access, because people will only give you access when they trust you and that they know you trust them. And that's one of the,
you're absolutely. I owned a staffing company, an outplacement firm, and a software company, all that were interrelated. We made job placement software. We had a recruiting division and an outplacement division. So you'd pay us to fire your people. We'd then get paid on the other end to place your people, and you would use our software on both sides of the equation and pay us for that. So it was a pretty good working model. But we told people that you have to learn how to network, and networking isn't knocking on the door and asking somebody to do something for you. Networking is building relationships that you provide leads and information long before you ask for anything in return. You make yourself, because Jesus had 12 in his inner circle, and they too had spheres of influence, and he actually sent out 70 of them, 2 by 2, to go out and expand the franchise opportunities, to go plant the seeds of God's kingdom, God's commerce into the outlying areas of the Jewish world. So it really is quite a connection. So that was part of the delegation, sending out his disciples and leaving people to go and giving the great commission. We mistake it often for the great omission, and that is we just preached it to people that look like us, sound like us, and live like us, when actually it was to be to the Jew first, then to the Greek. So I struggle with the great omission all the time. People are afraid to talk to Muslims. They're afraid to talk to Jews, and they just want to be comfortable in who they talk to about the Lord. And he was one who delegated and empowered. Luke 10:19 comes to mind as the single most empowering statement. He said, I give you the authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing whatsoever shall harm you. That's a pretty empowering. That's a Newt Rockney. That's a pep talk of all pep talks that says, hey, you're wearing this armor that I put on you. I've given you power and authority in my name to go do these things. That's the walk on water talk.
Yeah, a lot of people think delegation is go do this, but it isn't. One, you have to have walked that same path. Two, if you're asking people to perform a function, you have to give them authority, or otherwise you'll limit what they can do. So I think you're right that it's particularly Luke 19, really important message for aspiring business people to read.
You know, no question that Jesus was a change agent. He brought a new paradigm of thinking to the same book. He did not bring a new book.
Right.
He brought a new shift in thinking. And I did an interview a couple weeks ago with someone that called the millennials the hinge generation, that they're going to be the hinge to a new way of thinking. You and I grew up as a hinge generation. We brought a new way of thinking, and we went in the same structure, the same companies we came into, and we changed. We were the hinge to a new way of thinking. In sales, it now became solution selling, value-added propositions, cost-benefit ratios, new language in an old art. But we didn't bring a new book to the table, and Jesus didn't bring a new book to the table. There was no New Testament at the time of Jesus, so he must have been talking about change in the way you apply what his Father said and what his Father did. So he was a radical in his day.
Yeah, he definitely was a radical. The religious elite at that point had really consolidated power, and they consolidated it legalistically. And they would walk around with the long prayer shawl so that people would know how pious they are. But what Jesus' message was, you're exactly right. The commandments are what we should be following, but you follow them with your heart, not with law. And that was, to me, that was the biggest change he brought was, and one of the other things you had mentioned earlier, that all people are made in the image of God. You know, the Samaritan, the woman at the well, the tax collector. The tax collector, that other than shepherd, is the most, it has the most references in the Gospels of any occupation, but it was also the lowest, treated by that population as the lowest form of earning a living.
You refer to Jesus as the perfect salesman. For the Son of God, a man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. As the perfect salesman, what did he do differently than your guy you experienced at the car lot?
So when you go to the car, they have these specials and they have these spiffs, and that's what the salesman will try to sell you. But when you talk to the head, like in this case, I talked to a friend of mine who was the head finance guy for this company. I said, who sells the most cars for you? And he's pointed out this guy. And so I said to him, well, how many cars does he sell? He sells 30 a month, which is 1.5 a day. If you work, in a typical month, you work 22 days. And that's extraordinary. And it's almost double what a normal salesman would make. Here's what he did. He knew anniversaries, he knew birthdays, he knew what kids were going to college, he knew who was pregnant. And if you came in and that special this week was a Mustang and you had a family of 6, he was selling you a minivan. So that's serving. And I think as salespeople, you're to serve your customer. The customer isn't there to serve you. The customer isn't there to help you hit your sales goals. You're there to sell what they need. And we talk about that a lot in that chapter about service.
We have a term in business that was introduced in the HR world called diversity.
Yes.
We began to set affirmative action programs. We measure companies based on diversity hiring. But this is not a new model of the human resources world, even changing them from calling them personnel to HR, or then to HCM, human capital management. The architect of all that was Jesus, the builder of unusual teams. He was the first who built diversity and drew upon a wellspring of diverse, a tax collector, a fisherman. Who else was a part of this very unusual team he assembled?
Well, none were from the religious elite. Right. They were from all walks of life. And you had a zealot and the three fishermen, and you have the tax collector. Some of the other apostles, their occupation's a little fuzzier, but of those we can be sure. But the thing that Jesus did, and this is also a great lesson for business people, sure, resumes are great and they help get you a direction on the individual, but does the person have high integrity? Does a person get things done? Does a person listen to learn? Do they develop others? And can they analyze situations without being selfish? That's what Jesus looked for, and that's in your heart. So Jesus would take a lesser resume, which he did with these 12, for somebody who has a heart for God, and that's what he did. Now, in the diversity, one of the most interesting stories in the Bible is the woman at the well.
Yes.
Is a woman, she's at a well at noontime. She's Samaritan. And reputationally, Samaritans were not high on the social ladder in that period. Two, she's a woman at a time when it was very, very difficult to be a woman. And three, she's there at noontime. Now, generally in that period, you went with your community in the morning when it was not the hottest time of day. So what Jesus does is he convinces her about the purpose of his being on earth. And she in turn converts a nation. So he takes the humblest and the lowest of the low, people that we may not talk to, but Jesus was willing to.
You're exactly right. She actually became the first female evangelist and started the first revival of record in the Bible. And because he was so market-centric, 3 days, now out of a ministry that only lasted for, 1,400 days, for him to carve out 3 of those days is a big chunk of time in the sphere and scope of Jesus' life. He already had to make pilgrimage and was observant, and that takes up over a month of the year in observation of the Leviticus 23 feasts. So already 30 days at minimum are allocated, plus 64 Sabbaths are allocated out of that picture over those three and a half years of his ministry. But yet he devoted 3 days to a half-breed woman, knowing everything about her, and then receiving the people, right, and staying longer than you would think he would stay at such a rejected group of people. And that becomes the master of sensitivity to the marketplace. This must have been the first trade show exhibit. And we look at it, modern day reference, that he stayed there and he serviced all the needs of all those that wanted to visit his booth at the well. And so it's a fascinating look at Scripture through the lens of a former corporate executive, turnaround specialist, entrepreneur, and someone that came to the crossroads of life and went down the path of looking at ministry, getting his master's and doctorate in divinity to be able to become an effective ambassador for the Lord in the marketplace, in being able to coach and to mentor up-and-comers as a great way to incorporate their faith into the marketplace. Bruce Hartman, author of Jesus and Company, Connecting the Lessons of the Gospel with Today's Business World. Bruce, they can find you at what is the web address where they can find your new ministry?
www.brucelhartman.com.
www.brucelhartman.com. Bruce Hartman, thank you so much for being with us and sharing this great work here with us on Revealing the Truth.
All right, thanks for having me.
All right,
Really
God bless you, my friend. Thank you. And that brings to an end our live broadcast day, but that doesn't mean we go off the air. We broadcast 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right here from our studios here in Birmingham, Alabama. Until we see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock a.m. Central Time. We'll see you on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on our WND TV feed. And back here tomorrow. Until we see you then, we bid you shalom.